The Arabian Slave Trade. A chapter of history that is often overlooked, yet its impact echoes through time. It is a story that shaped entire regions, cultures, and countless lives. It's a part of our history, a dark and painful one. The remnants of this era can still be seen in the ruins and artifacts scattered across the Middle East and Africa, silent witnesses to the suffering endured by so many. For centuries, it brought suffering to millions. Men, women, and children were torn from their homes, forced to march across unforgiving deserts or sail treacherous seas, their fates uncertain and their futures stolen. It's a story we need to remember, not just as a lesson from the past, but as a reminder of the resilience of the human spirit and the importance of justice and compassion. This trade began long ago, even before Islam. It was rooted in ancient customs and economic systems, evolving over centuries as empires rose and fell, and as new trade routes opened across continents. Arab traders traveled across land and sea, navigating vast deserts and braving the open waters of the Indian Ocean. Their journeys connected distant civilizations, but also spread the shadow of slavery far and wide. They sought riches and power, but their journeys came at a terrible cost. The pursuit of wealth led to unimaginable suffering, as people were reduced to mere commodities in a relentless quest for profit. For over 1,000 years, the trade continued. Generations were born and lost under its shadow, and its legacy still lingers in the memories and histories of many communities. It stretched from the 7th century all the way to the 20th century, spanning more than a millennium of human history and affecting countless lives across continents. Imagine, that's longer than many countries have existed. The Arabian slave trade outlasted empires, dynasties, and even the rise and fall of entire nations. The Arabian slave trade wasn't just about buying and selling people. It was a complex system that involved traders, rulers, and entire societies, all complicit in the machinery of exploitation. It was about exploitation and cruelty. Families were torn apart, cultures were disrupted, and generations suffered under the weight of oppression. It was a system that treated human beings as property, denying them their dignity, freedom, and humanity. This is a history we must confront, understand, and never forget. Imagine a map of the world, its surface crisscrossed with invisible lines of connection, commerce, and movement. For centuries, these lines have shaped the destinies of nations and peoples, weaving together distant lands in ways both seen and unseen. Now, picture bold lines stretching from the heart of Africa to the bustling cities of the Middle East, winding across the vast Indian Ocean, and reaching even into the far corners of Europe. These routes were not just paths for goods and spices, but for people, millions of lives uprooted and transported far from home. These lines represent the roots of the Arabian slave trade, a network that operated for over 1,000 years, connecting continents and shaping societies in profound ways. This wasn't a small, contained event. It spanned across continents, impacting countless lives and leaving a legacy that still echoes today. The scale was immense, with entire regions drawn into its orbit. It wasn't limited to one region or culture. Its reach was vast, touching people of many backgrounds, faiths, and traditions. The trade's influence extended into the daily lives of communities, altering the course of families and generations. Africa was the primary source of enslaved people. Villages and towns across the continent lived in constant fear of raids, as slavers sought to capture men, women, and children to feed the insatiable demand. Men, women, and children were taken from their homes, their families torn apart in an instant. The trauma of separation was profound, with loved ones often never seeing each other again. They came from diverse backgrounds, cultures, and languages, each person carrying unique stories, traditions, and hopes. The loss of this diversity was a tragedy felt across generations. These enslaved Africans were then forced to endure grueling journeys across treacherous deserts and perilous seas. Caravans crossed the scorching Sahara, while ships braved the unpredictable waters of the Indian Ocean, all under harsh and unforgiving conditions. Many died during these journeys, victims of disease, starvation, or exhaustion. The desert claimed countless lives, and the sea was equally merciless, with storms and overcrowded vessels leading to tragedy. Those who survived faced a bleak and uncertain future. Torn from everything they knew, they entered a world where freedom was a distant memory and hope was often hard to find. The legacy of this trade is a reminder of the resilience of the human spirit and the enduring impact of history on our world today. The journey began with violence. For countless men, women, and children, life changed in an instant as their villages were attacked without warning. The sound of chaos shattered the night, and the peaceful rhythm of daily life was replaced by terror and confusion. Arab slave traders, often accompanied by local guides who knew the land and its people, would plan and execute sudden raids. These attacks were swift and calculated, designed to catch villagers off guard and maximize the number of captives taken. They targeted the most vulnerable, the elderly, women and children, those who were easiest to subdue and transport. The strong and able-bodied were often killed if they resisted, while the rest were rounded up and bound together. Imagine the terror of a village under attack, the screams of families being torn apart, the confusion as people tried desperately to escape, and the heartbreak as loved ones were separated, perhaps forever. The trauma of these moments would haunt survivors for the rest of their lives. These raids were brutal and merciless, leaving behind not just physical destruction, but deep emotional scars that would last for generations. Entire communities were shattered, homes burned, and the land left in mourning. Once captured, the ordeal was far from over. The captives were bound tightly, often with rough ropes or heavy chains, and forced to begin a long and grueling march toward the distant coast. Those captured were then forced to march, sometimes for weeks or even months, to reach the coast. The journey was relentless, with little rest and constant fear of violence from their captors. They were chained together, often with little food or water. The harsh sun beat down on them by day, and the cold bit at night. Many were forced to walk barefoot, their feet bleeding and swollen from the rough terrain. Many succumbed to exhaustion and illness along the way. The weak and sick were left behind, unable to keep up, and often perished alone. For those who survived, the physical and emotional toll was immense. Upon reaching the coast, the survivors were crammed onto ships. The sight of the vast ocean was terrifying for many who had never seen it before, and the prospect of what lay ahead was even more daunting. Conditions on these vessels were horrific. The captives were forced into the dark, cramped holds of the ships, where there was barely enough room to sit, let alone lie down. People were packed tightly together, with little ventilation or sanitation. The stench was overwhelming, and the air was thick with fear and despair. Disease spread rapidly, and many perished during the long voyage. For those who survived, the nightmare was far from over. Their suffering would continue on distant shores, far from home and family. For those who survived the journey, a life of forced labor awaited. They were sold in markets, treated as commodities, their humanity stripped away. Their lives were ones of hardship and brutality. They worked in fields, mines, and households, subject to the whims of their owners. They had no rights, no freedom, and no hope of returning home. Women and girls often faced additional horrors. They were vulnerable to sexual exploitation and abuse, treated as objects of pleasure for their masters. Children were not spared from this cruelty. They were forced to work alongside adults, enduring the same backbreaking labor and inhumane treatment. Their innocence was stolen, their childhoods erased. The impact of the Arabian slave trade went far beyond the individuals enslaved. It ripped apart families and communities, leaving behind a legacy of trauma and loss. Imagine for a moment a mother losing a child, a husband separated from his wife, a village robbed of its young people. The pain was, honestly, immeasurable. The psychological scars of this trade ran deep. Generations grew up with the knowledge that their ancestors had been stolen, their cultures disrupted, their histories fractured. But even in the face of such adversity, the human spirit endured. African societies found ways to cope, to rebuild, and to preserve their cultures despite the horrors they had endured. The Arabian slave trade left deep scars on the African continent. It drained Africa of its people, its strength, and its potential. It's a loss that continues to resonate today. For centuries, parts of Africa were deprived of their workforce. This hindered economic development and left many communities struggling to survive. The trade also fueled conflict and instability. African rulers, eager to profit from the slave trade, engaged in wars and raids to capture and sell captives. The legacy of this trade is complex and multifaceted. It's a history of exploitation and resilience, of loss and survival. It's a history that Africa continues to grapple with today. The Arabian slave trade didn't just impact Africa, it also played a significant role in shaping societies in the Middle East. The arrival of millions of enslaved Africans had a profound impact on the social and cultural fabric of the region. African influences can be seen in music, cuisine, and even language. Enslaved Africans contributed to the economies of the Middle East, working in agriculture, construction, and domestic service. They were essential to the functioning of many societies. However, the legacy of slavery also contributed to racial and social hierarchies that persist in some parts of the region today. The Arabian slave trade extended its reach even further, across the Indian Ocean to the shores of Asia. Enslaved Africans were brought to India, Persia, and even China. These Africans often found themselves integrated into existing social structures, serving in various roles from soldiers to domestic servants. Their presence brought about cultural exchange, introducing new skills, customs, and traditions to their new homes. However, their experiences were often marked by exploitation and hardship, a reminder of the far-reaching consequences of the slave trade. The Arabian slave trade is a difficult and painful subject, but it's a part of our shared history, and we have a responsibility to remember it. By understanding the past, we can learn from its mistakes and work to create a better future. We can challenge injustice and fight for equality. The stories of those who were enslaved should not be forgotten. Their resilience, their strength, and their humanity should inspire us to build a world where everyone is treated with dignity and respect. The Arabian slave trade may be over, but its legacy lives on. It's our duty to ensure that such atrocities never happen again.